Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. Today we'll be in Numbers chapter 15, verse 17, through chapter 16, verse 40. The Lord spoke to Moses. Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land to which I am bringing you, and you eat some of the food of the land, you must offer up a raised offering to the Lord. You must offer up a cake of the first of your finely ground flour as a raised offering. As you offer the raised offering of the threshing floor, so you must offer it up. You must give the Lord some of the first of your finely ground flour as a raised offering in your future generations. If you sin unintentionally and do not observe all these commandments that the Lord has spoken to Moses, all that the Lord has commanded you by the authority of Moses, from the day that the Lord commanded Moses, and continuing through your future generations, then if anything is done unintentionally, without the knowledge of the community, the whole community must prepare one young bull for a burnt offering, for a pleasing aroma to the Lord, along with its grain offering and its customary drink offering, and one male goat for a purification offering. And the priest is to make atonement for the whole community of the Israelites, and they will be forgiven, because it was unintentional, and they have brought their offering, an offering made by fire to the Lord, and their purification offering before the Lord for their unintentional offense. And the whole community of the Israelites, and the resident foreigner who lives among them, will be forgiven, since all the people were involved in the unintentional offense. If any person sins unintentionally, then he must bring a yearling female goat for a purification offering. And the priest must make atonement for the person who sins unintentionally, when he sins unintentionally before the Lord, to make atonement for him, and he will be forgiven. You must have one law for the person who sins unintentionally, both for the native born among the Israelites and for the resident foreigner who lives among them. But the person who acts defiantly, whether native born or a resident foreigner, insults the Lord. That person must be cut off from among his people. Because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment, that person must be completely cut off. His iniquity will be on him. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and to the whole community. They put him in custody because there was no clear instruction about what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, "The man must surely be put to death. The whole community must stone him with stones outside the camp." So the whole community took him outside the camp and stoned him to death, just as the Lord commanded Moses. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them to make tassels for themselves on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and put a blue thread on the tassel of the corners. You must have this tassel so that you may look at it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and obey them, and so that you do not follow after your own heart and your own eyes that leads you to unfaithfulness. Thus you will remember and obey all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God." Now, Korah, son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, these sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, who were Reubenites, took men and rebelled against Moses, along with some of the Israelites, 250 leaders of the community, chosen from the assembly, famous men. And they assembled against Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, seeing that the whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the community of the Lord?" When Moses heard it, he fell down with his face to the ground. Then he said to Korah and to all his community, "In the morning the Lord will make known who are his and who is holy. He will cause that person to approach him. The person he has chosen he will also cause to approach him. Do this, Korah, you and all your company. Take censers, put fire in them, and set incense on them before the Lord tomorrow, and the man whom the Lord chooses will be holy. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi." Moses said to Korah, "Listen now, you sons of Levi. Does it seem too small a thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the community of Israel, to bring you near to himself, to perform the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the community to minister to them? He has brought you near, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you. Do you seek the priesthood also? Therefore you and all your company have assembled together against the Lord. And Aaron, what is he that you murmur against him?" Then Moses summoned Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, "We will not come up. Is it a small thing you have brought us up out of the land that flows with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness? Now do you want to make yourself a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into the land that flows with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Do you think you can blind these men? We will not come up." Moses was very angry, and he said to the Lord, "Have no respect for their offering. I have not taken so much as one donkey from them, nor have I harmed any one of them." Then Moses said to Korah, "You and all your company present yourselves before the Lord, you and they and Aaron tomorrow. And each of you take his censer, put incense in it, and then each of you present his censer before the Lord, 250 censers along with you, and Aaron, each of you, with his censer." So everyone took his censer, put fire in it, and set incense on it, and stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. When Korah assembled the whole community against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting, then the glory of the Lord appeared to the whole community. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Separate yourselves from among this community, that I may consume them in an instant." Then they threw themselves down with their faces to the ground and said, "O God, the God of the spirits of all people, will you be angry with the whole community when only one man sins?" So the Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell the community, get away from around the homes of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." Then Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel went after him. And he said to the community, "Move away from the tents of these wicked men, and do not touch anything they have, lest you be destroyed because of all their sins." So they got away from the homes of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stationed themselves in the entrances of their tents, with their wives, their children, and their toddlers. Then Moses said, "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die a natural death, or if they share the fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord does something entirely new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up along with all they have, and they go down alive to the grave, then you will know that these men have despised the Lord." When he had finished speaking all these words, the ground that was under them split open, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, along with their households, and all Korah's men and all their goods. They and all that they had went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed over them. So they perished from among the community. All the Israelites who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "What if the earth swallows us too?" Then a fire went out from the Lord and devoured the 250 men who offered incense. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, to pick up the censers out of the flame, for they are holy, and then scatter the coals of fire at a distance. As for the censers of these men who sinned at the cost of their lives, they must be made into hammered sheets for covering the altar, because they presented them before the Lord and sanctified them. They will become a sign to the Israelites." So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers presented by those who had been burned up, and they were hammered out as a covering for the altar. It was a memorial for the Israelites that no outsider who was not a descendant of Aaron should approach to burn incense before the Lord, that he might not become like Korah and his company, just as the Lord had spoken by the authority of Moses. Yeah, so you had the prescriptions regarding a wave offering. Then, and for sins made unintentionally, and for sins made intentionally, a Sabbath breaker who was stoned to death. And then tassels commanded. And then the rebellion of Korah here. So, yeah, I guess first off, considering the rebellion of Korah, it says that all in that company were consumed, but I think that this is exaggerated language because, and similar to other language used in Joshua and the all around the Exodus account of completely and all and totally destroyed and annihilated type thing of meaning a large amount, like how we would use it in a sports team, regarding somebody playing sports of, oh, that team went out and slaughtered the other team. It's not as though they went out and literally killed the opposing team. More so, what is meant is that they had a resounding victory. And my proof of this is that despite it saying that all of Korah's camp was destroyed, you have Psalms that are written later, written by the sons of Korah. So it wasn't a complete destruction. Let's see here. So concerning the wave offering, when you come into the land in which I bring you, this shows how rich in promise and encouragement these commands are. God sets their mind on the promised land even though they are a long way from it. Keeping their minds on his promise will help see them through the wilderness and prepare the hearts of the new generation to succeed where the old generation failed. Yeah. And it's cool that God is still promising this to them despite the ways in which they've sinned. If you sin unintentionally, significantly, the Bible talks about sins unintentionally committed. Many today think and live as if an action is unintentional, it cannot be sin. But many of the worst sins are committed with the best of intentions. Intentions matter nothing when the result is sin. Especially in the 20th century, all sorts of horrific atrocities and terror have been committed by those dedicated to honorable causes. Communism sought to establish a just, fair economy where each worked according to his ability and received according to his need. An honorable goal, and became the instrument of the genocide of tens of millions of people. Today in the church, many a gossip, many a talebearer, many a divisive person will claim the best of intentions. Even if we agree that they have the right intentions, they still may be in grievous sin. The same applies for a myriad of other sins we are often ready to ignore or think lightly of, all on the basis of, after all, they had good intentions. That the whole congregation shall offer one young bull as a burnt offering. Unintentional sin needs a blood atonement. A bull had to be sacrificed when the nation as a whole was guilty, and a female goat had to be sacrificed when an individual was guilty. You shall have one law for him who sins unintentionally. There was to be no exception. Sin is sin, and must be accounted as such, even if the motive seemed good. Yeah. But the person who does anything presumptuously. Literally, to sin presumptuously means to sin with a high hand. It speaks of a flagrant rebellion against God, the law of Moses, and the nation as a whole. That person shall be completely cut off. His guilt shall be upon him. Such sin was not to be tolerated in Israel. The command was a cultural mechanism for addressing the sin and ensuring that such arrogant flaunting of public morality would not be rewarded. This is in stark contrast to modern culture, where notorious flagrant sinners are rewarded with fame and fortune. Instead of his guilt shall be upon him, our society puts guilt on anyone who would judge or condemn such depraved individuals by calling what they do evil. Yeah. And then, immediately following that, you have a man who is sinning in high-handed rebellion here by gathering sticks on the Sabbath. This was an immediate example of dealing with someone who sinned presumptuously. All of Israel knew the Sabbath law, and this man no doubt thought himself a courageous social reformer, trying by his example to free the nation from the shackles of heaven's law. The man must surely be put to death. Instead, God commanded the execution of this presumptuous sinner, that all might fear. This was so all who would know that the social order and law of God are more important than any individual's right to attack or destroy that social order or law of God. Yeah, I think it's important to take into account that God was working actively among them, leading them with a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day, miraculously providing for them bread in the wilderness, meat, water, defense for them. And this man goes and actively flaunts the law of God while God is presiding among them. And yeah. So, though we might not consider it a capital crime to gather sticks, it's what this crime represented. That is, active rebellion against God in their midst. That's, I think, more in view here. Tassels on the corners of their garments, and the blue thread in the tassels of the corners. These were intended to remind Israel to whom they belonged. They were God's people. Such reminders are an effective preventative remedy for sin. That you may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them. We might imagine in Israel being tempted into some kind of sin, and then catching sight of his own distinctive garments, reminding him of who he is, and reminding him that others can see who he is, a child of God and not a child of the sin he is contemplating. In this sense, Christian-themed clothing and jewelry and such can indeed serve a purpose. Such things can remind us of who we are and provide a kind of walking accountability for our conduct. However, man's instinctive pride always has a way of perverting such good and holy commands of God. In Jesus' day, he directly rebuked the abuse of this command among the religious elite, speaking of how they would enlarge the borders of their garments, making the tasseled areas as conspicuous as possible, as an ostentatious display of their holiness. Yeah. Good when it serves a reminder to live holy lives unto God. Bad when we use it as a ostentatious display of holiness. Of, oh, look at me, look how holy I am. The rebellion of Korah. Now Korah, the son of Izhar. This rebellion, like all, had a leader and followers. The leader was Korah, descended from Kohath. But Moses and Korah were descended from Kohath, but by different sons. Moses through Amram, and Korah through Izhar. The Kohathites had the most exalted duty among the Levites. Their charge was to carry the most holy things of the temple, after Aaron and his sons had covered them with the specially prepared coverings. The name Korah means baldness. Old Baldy was going to give Moses a tough time. You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy. Korah was not content with what the Lord had called him to do, in serving with the other Levites of the family of Kohath. He accused Moses of pride and exclusionary leadership. It was significant this accusation was made publicly, in front of 250 leaders of the congregation, men of renown. Men like Korah are always playing to an audience, always trying to draw a following after themselves. After Moses had already gathered the nation and led them this far, of course. Yeah. There was also a bit with the Reubenites here as well. Sons of Levi and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and Owen, son of Peleth, who were Reubenites. So, not just the sons of Kohath, but also some sons of Reuben as well. You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. This was a clever attack. Korah acted as if he represented the people and fought for their interests. The truth was that he desired a following and a position of leadership for himself. Moses, you shouldn't be the leader. Let everyone be a leader. God can speak to everyone. Rebels and divisive persons have always used such words for their cause. Significantly, Korah proclaimed the holiness of the people and regarded strong leadership as unnecessary. At the very time when the nation was not holy and desperately needed strong leadership, Korah, like many rebels and divisive persons, completely misread the state of the flock because he was not a true shepherd. Yeah, this was immediately after the people had refused to go into the promised land. And as such, the punishment for them was to die in the wilderness. Hardly what I would call holy unto the Lord. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the congregation of the Lord? Korah accused Moses and Aaron of pride and self-seeking. The truth was that Moses had not aspired to his position, that God had indeed called him, and Moses did not, in fact, see himself as above the congregation. It's interesting, too, that this complaint comes after Moses, is attacked by Aaron and Miriam for essentially the same thing. Has not God spoken to us as well? That is, Aaron and Miriam saying that. And Miriam is struck leprous by this and expelled from the camp for a time. I doubt that such a thing would have remained silent, would have remained hidden from the rest of the camp. And yet here you have the sons of Korah doing the exact same thing, and the punishment being worse for it, because a warning had already been given out for this exact same rebellion. When Moses heard it, he fell on his face. Moses first prayed, being a humble man. He probably asked God if his critics were right or had something to teach him. He probably asked God what should be done in this situation. He certainly asked God to spare the nation, and he asked God to not allow these divisive men to bring permanent harm to the people of God. And he spoke to Korah and all his company. We don't know how long Moses prayed, but after that prayer he had a sense of God's direction for this crisis. He issued a challenge whereby Korah and his followers would come before the Lord, and Moses and Aaron would also come, so that the Lord would choose his leaders. Yeah, would that we also fall on our faces before the Lord in times of crisis, especially in interpersonal conflict, where it's really difficult to get out of the immediacy of people accusing you and into the larger reality that is that we all stand before God. So, you take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi. This shows that Moses did not doubt the outcome of the test. He knew that God would prove him right and Korah wrong. Therefore, Moses was unafraid to put it to the test. It is a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel. Moses knew that the rebellion of Korah was rooted in ingratitude. They were not thankful for the wonderful ministry God gave them to do. He rebuked the pride and self-seeking that prompted their challenge. Even if Korah was right, this was the wrong way to approach the problem. A power play like this was the wrong way to remove a leader like Moses. The methods of Korah, his use of accusation, intimidation, the gathering of a rival following, revealed his rebellious, divisive heart. Yeah. Yeah, it should have, if he thought he had a legitimate case, come to Moses first off. Not in this aggrandizing way of lobbing a public accusation against Moses without any precursor to it. Dathan and Abiram, these were co-conspirators with Korah. They would not even meet with Moses nor answer his challenge. They chose to accuse Moses instead. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? Out of a land of milk and honey. This shows that Dathan and Abiram colored the past. They thought of Egypt as a land of milk and honey, even for the Hebrew slaves. Rebels and divisive people commonly create a past of their own preference, a past that puts leaders like Moses into the worst possible light. Yeah, essentially Dathan and Abiram here are gaslighting hard in that they're coloring the past as though they were living in the lap of luxury in Egypt, with being in a land of milk and honey. And Moses here callously bringing them out, yanking them out into the wilderness under some false pretense, and to the point where, to the end that they would be killed in the wilderness. This shows that Dathan and Abiram assigned an evil heart to Moses. They spoke as if they had discovered the plot of Moses and Aaron to lead the nation into the wilderness and then kill them. The foolishness of this shows how, against all reason, rebels and divisive people often assign every evil intention to the heart of leaders like Moses. Yeah. I think it's easy for us, in retrospect, with the biblical context, to just be like, what foolish men this Korah and his group are. Don't they know? Don't they realize that they're in the very presence of God, and that God will punish this severely? But I think that if we were in similar situations, that it would be a lot more difficult. I think today, it's just like, if somebody is accused of evil doing, it's like, oh, well, did they do it or not? And the effect that has socially, because ultimately some people believe that every evil report about a person, that you should keep acting like a prince over us. This shows that Dathan and Abiram refused to acknowledge growth in Moses. It was true that Moses was at one time a prince, a self-confident man who thought he could deliver and lead Israel with his own hand. God broke him of that with 40 years of leading another man's flock in the wilderness. Yet Dathan and Abiram threw it back in his face, as if God had never dealt with Moses in this area. You have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey. This shows that Dathan and Abiram had unfair expectation of Moses. It was true that Moses had not yet brought them to the promised land, and it was true that some of the blame must lay at the feet of Moses, because he agreed to the demand of the people to send spies into the promised land. Yet it is wrong to wholly blame Moses for this, or to think that Korah could have done any better. It is unbelievably easy for the Korahs of this world to sit back and say, if I was leading this nation at Kadesh Barnea, I would have done thus and so. But Korah was not leading the nation, and men of his type rarely do. God rarely puts the Monday morning quarterbacks, the backseat drivers, in positions of real leadership, except as a chastisement to show them just how difficult leadership really is, and that perfect leadership, like perfect anything, is impossible. Leaders should expect to be held to a higher standard, but it is patently unfair to hold a leader to a perfect standard. We will not come up. This shows that Dathan and Abiram considered themselves under no authority. It is said loud and clear, Moses, we have no respect for your authority. We will listen to God, but not to you. Your word means nothing to us. They simply wouldn't submit. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. Perhaps Dathan and Abiram did not speak for all of the 250 leaders, representatives, and men of renown, yet none of those 250 were heard to raise an opposing voice to their harsh accusations. Some of the 250 thought that maybe Dathan and Abiram were going a little far, but they did not have their courage to speak up. They were wrong because they allowed Moses to be accused this way with no one to defend him. It was easy for them to stand back and say, well, I won't take sides. I can be friends to both groups. But here, and in many subsequent conflicts, silence is taken as agreement. If a godly man or woman, especially a leader, is being falsely accused and you say nothing, you have sinned because your silence is received as agreement. Yeah. It takes courage to stand up when there is a false accusation being bandied about. But it has to be done. After this, Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, he knew he had done nothing to deserve such accusations, and Moses did the right thing. Moses left the situation to God. Remember that Moses was, after all, a man of political power. It was certainly within his capability to have Korah and his followers arrested and or executed. Instead, he left the situation to God. Some people are offended that a man like Moses was angry with men like Dathan and Abiram. They think a gentle, easy love is the proper response. Such thinking is understandable, but wrong. Shepherds are gentle with wayward sheep who might injure themselves, but they are passionate against wolves who would injure the flock. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them. This shows that Moses was a man of integrity and service to the people. Moses could rest in his clean conscience before God. Yeah, and it reminds me of Samuel. At the end of his ministry, he says, like, okay, all of you, whose donkey have I stolen, or whose land have I taken unfairly? And they said to him, you haven't done this to us. And he essentially says, with a clean hand, I've acted towards this people. So, yeah, it wasn't with an eye for monetary gain that Moses did this to them. So what sort of motive are they ascribing to Moses here? Let each take his censer and put incense in it, and each of you bring his censer before the Lord. This specified the challenge. God would approve or disapprove of these 250 men gathered with censers of incense before the door of the tabernacle. God used the censers with fire and incense in this test for a good reason. A censer is a metal pot used to burn incense, and they were used in the priestly worship of God. Since Korah and his companions questioned Moses and Aaron's right to lead the nation and conduct the priesthood, each group would come to the Lord as worshiping priests, and God would show which group he accepted. Yeah, it was the realm of the priest to offer incense before the Lord. Later on in Israel's history, you have King Uzziah, who gets an inflated view of himself and thinks that he will also offer incense before the Lord. And so he goes in there waving a censer, and the priests try to stop him and are arguing with him. And as they're arguing, leprosy breaks out on the forehead of Uzziah, and he's eager to get out of there. So this elevation of oneself to the priesthood is not good. Moses made the rebels take the position they desired, the position of priest. Often the best judgment on the divisive and rebellious is to let them lead. Humanly speaking, the odds were not good. It was Moses and Aaron standing alone against all the congregation. Yet God would make this choice, and not popular opinion. Separate yourselves, God said to Moses and Aaron. It is as if God said, Moses and Aaron, will you please move away? I'm going to destroy all these rebels in an instant, and I don't want you to get hurt, that I may consume them in a moment. God decided to make his choice immediately evident. Sometimes this is not the case when God deals with modern Korahs and their followers. Then they fell on their faces. This was amazing love from Moses and Aaron. Undoubtedly, one of God's reasons for allowing such a painful event in the life of Moses was that God wanted to see this kind of love drawn out of Moses. Perhaps it was only the prayer of Moses and Aaron which could spare the lives of these men who have tried to bring them down. Such love for the undeserving shows that Moses and Aaron were growing in love and being transformed into the image of Jesus before Jesus even walked the earth. Yeah, this is intercessory. This is the act of an intercessor to people who don't deserve it. Shall one man sin and you be angry with all the congregation? Moses and Aaron saw right through it. Though many were involved, at least more than 250, one man was at the center of it all, Korah. His sin, his drawing of a group after himself, was the cause of all this mess. The elders of Israel followed him. This was glorious. God had appointed elders back in Numbers 10, 16 through 30, in response to another attack on Moses' leadership. There, the elders were to be men with the same spirit and vision as Moses, men to help him bear the burden, men to stand with Moses, here they did exactly what God appointed them to do. They separated themselves from Korah. Lest you should be consumed in all their sins, Moses, in response to God's command to get away from the tents of the leaders of the rebellion, pled with the people to separate themselves from the divisive persons. This same attitude should be among God's people today. They should stay away from divisive, argumentative, contentious people in the body of Christ. You don't want to be close to them if God should deal with them. A divisive, contentious man will influence you, and you do not want to be consumed in their sins. Remember, a divisive, contentious person will never claim to be divisive and contentious. They always consider their work a noble cause. Therefore, Christians need some discernment and to look at what others do, not only at what they say. The ground split apart under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up. This was just the way Korah, Dathan, and Abiram were destroyed, along with their families. We may be uneasy seeing the families destroyed also, but it clearly shows that the families of the rebellious, divisive, contentious people suffer also, often greatly. And so they made bronze coverings out of the censers. The censers were beaten flat and used to cover the main altar of sacrifice. The censers of the rebels were holy and preserved because even though Korah and his followers worshipped wrongly, they worshipped the right God. In the end, each one of the 250 were identified completely with Korah. Perhaps that wasn't how they meant it. Well, I don't agree with everything Korah says, but he's got some good points. But to God, all those distinctions were lost. All the censers are hammered together and collectively titled Korah and his companions. The censers were thus memorialized and served as an important reminder God appoints his leaders, and no one should be a divisive rebel like Korah. If Christians today encounter ungodly, divisive leadership, they should do what the 250 followers of Korah did not do. The right thing to do is, if possible, remove yourself from such leaders without becoming rebellious and divisive. If it isn't possible, leave it up to God to deal with, as David allowed God to deal with Saul, instead of taking matters into his own hands. Yeah. Anywho. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great day.